I just built this shipping container cabin. Now that we have winter weather on the way, the next obvious question is, how am I going to heat this thing? That is so nice of you to ask. I'll show you, or at least I think I will, or this may turn into a complete disaster. I am completely off grid here. All of my electricity comes from solar panels. Even after I add the other panels to these ones, it still won't be enough for heating in cloudy weather. And even if I was to take on a steady diet of beans and cruciferous vegetables, there still wouldn't be enough natural gas here for heating. In managing my forest land here, my biggest challenge is trying to figure out what to do with all the wood. Since I have an excess of wood here, and since I really like wood heat, I think it makes sense to heat it with wood. I could heat with propane, but this is not the best place to have propane delivered. Hauling bottles into town to have them filled, that's no fun. Although I've always been heavily biased toward firewood, so take that into account when you decide how much you want to listen to me. Let's go find out if using a wood stove to heat my shipping container tiny house is a good idea or just a cockamamie scheme that's going to lead to disaster. I was thinking about putting a regular size stove in here since I already have a couple, but space is limited and I think that would be overkill. So for a tiny house, I think we need a tiny stove. I'll show you what I just picked up from the nice folks at FedEx. Boxes. I picked up boxes and one really nicely packaged crate. I think this is the wood stove. We'll move this over here to where I want it. I'll change into my wood stove installing hat, then we can open this up, see what's in it. Now that I have the right hat for the right job, we can put this together, see how it works. Hopefully my next video won't have to be titled something like 10,000 reasons why you should never put a wood stove in a shipping container tiny house. Definitely don't want to be wearing the wrong hat for the wrong job. And with Halloween coming up next week, this one is a little bit festive. The crate is pretty nice. This could be used as a piece of rustic industrial furniture. I may have just came up with a new decor, industrial rustic. Hold on while I go swap out this battery. Remember the days when we actually used screwdrivers? If you're under 30, you probably don't know what I'm talking about. Back then, swapping batteries in order to manipulate screws wasn't even a thing. Now we lift this off to see what's inside. Packaging materials are inside. And eventually what appears to be a wood stove. With all kinds of stuff inside. Parts and pieces and paraphernalia. Hopefully I don't have to resort to doing the unthinkable and read the instructions. Silica gel, do not eat. Glad I read that in time. Looks like more of it comes in this heavy box. More mysterious paraphernalia wrapped in more packaging. Click, click. So far, this seems like a really well-built stove, but the first thing I'm not happy about is the mounting system for the glass. There's no real clear instruction whether this little tab goes this way, which doesn't look like it would work very well. I assume it goes this way. The screw needs to go into the threads on the door, but the threads are catching on the side of the tab. And if there's any movement that happens, this white thing just shreds to little pieces. This one is still intact, but with this one, there's not much left of it. Looks like the screw needs to be all the way through the tab so the threads don't catch on it. Then it goes in okay. Just snug, not too tight so it doesn't break the glass. I guess that works, but I think something better could be done for mounting the glass. One of the reasons I went with this company, aside from it looked like they had one of the better stoves, they had this nifty little deal on their website where you enter all the dimensions from the floor to where you want your flue to go out, how high your roof is. You just enter all these numbers and it comes out with all the parts you need. Supposedly, all the parts we need are going to be in this box, which would be nice because I am a long way away from stores out here. If I have to take multiple trips into town to go get more parts, it can be kind of an ordeal from out here. Parts and pieces and all kinds of parts and pieces. All kinds of parts and pieces. Who knew a chimney flue had to be so complicated? Anytime I've ever built one, I didn't use all these pieces. Maybe it's like one of those cases where you put something together and have a whole lot of pieces left over. In my case, I didn't even know I needed to have all the pieces I needed to have. I just put it together with what I thought I needed, which wasn't all of this. I wonder what I did wrong. These are the heat shields. The heat shield reduces the clearance required between the stove and combustibles, which is just a fancy way of saying you can move your stove closer to the wall without catching the wall on fire. It even comes with an Allen wrench for these bolts. Now instead of having 1,000,000 Allen wrenches laying around, now I have 1,000,001. Just what I need, more Allen wrenches. Just the same thing on the other side. Since this is the same as the other one, I'll spare you from having to watch me put this one on. If you really want to watch it, just back the video up a little bit and watch this one again. Just pretend it's this one. Heated air can rise between the space, but the shield blocks a lot of the radiant heat, so it doesn't catch things over here on fire. The back shield goes back here, in the back of course, but Houston, we have a problem. I have this one venting to the rear instead of the top. Doing it that way gives us the whole top for a cooking surface. But that means we're going to have more clearance in the back if we can't have that shield on here. But maybe that's okay because of all the paraphernalia that's going to go back here brings us out anyway. Which brings us to setting up all the paraphernalia back here. Which brings us to what could be the downfall of this whole system. Instead of venting out through the roof, having to dig a hole through the roof. No, you don't dig a hole through the roof, you would cut a hole through the roof. Having the potential for eventual leaks, having to modify the container, which I'm trying to avoid, I decided to go out through the wall. It'll exit through this utility wall. One of the problems with wall venting, it's going to have 2 90-degree turns, one inside, then a vertical pipe. No, not vertical. The opposite of vertical, a horizontal pipe and another 90, that can cause a restriction in the flow, which can lead to problems with draft, and it can create a situation where when you open the stove door, smoke comes out. Hopefully with all those fancy parts and pieces, that won't be a problem. We'll have to see. That's not going to work. I think I messed this up. When I filled out the form, it said measure the distance between the floor and where this is supposed to exit. I literally did that. I measured the distance from the floor to there, thinking there would be enough adjustment in this telescoping pipe to account for whatever I decide to do underneath the stove to set the stove on. But originally I was going to buy the extended legs for it, instead of just getting the short standard ones. Then I decided I can easily build up a pedestal to set this on. But when I made that decision, I didn't adjust the height to account for this being up higher. So the pipes they sent me are too long, even if I take this one out, to account for the stove being up higher and having this actually down here where I need it to go out for certain reasons, which instead of explaining, I'll show you when we actually get to that part. So I need to get a shorter pipe or cut this one, which I don't want to do because it has these collars for the clamps, or build a more elaborate hearth to set this on. Originally, if this was going to be up high, I only need enough of a hearth to catch any glowing sparks or embers. But if this is going to be down low, I need to get more of an elaborate hearth that's going to insulate from the heat so I don't catch the floor on fire, which I don't want to do. I don't like it when I catch the floor on fire. So I need to either get a shorter pipe so I can raise this up, which would be nice to have it up at a higher level for comfort. Be good for cooking on and for loading the stove. This is not a bad position for loading the stove, either up here or down here. I think this is actually more comfortable and natural. I'm in a full squat down here. A full standing position up here is way too high. If it was here, it's maybe a little bit no man's land. Or I could take a knee, which is a comfortable position for lighting and loading, although not so much for my knee. You have to consider the ergonomics of things. Either way, I think what I'm going to do is build the more elaborate hearth that could accommodate it either setting down on it or up above. Either way, it would be good, I think, to have a better hearth so it doesn't catch the floor on fire. I think not catching the floor on fire is a good quality for anything you put in a house, including a wood stove. So I'll do that. I'll start out by having it down low, set it up that way. If I decide I don't like that, then I can get a shorter pipe, put it on a pedestal, and lift it up. A couple days later, and a trip into town, I came back with a sheet of cement board and some concrete pavers. I decided to go with the pavers because they're quick and easy, inexpensive. I've done it before with good results. And if I decide I want to change to something else, it's easy to take these out and I can use them for something else, which has been the theme of this whole container build. All the parts can be taken apart easily, changed around, or used for something else. Then I decided having these pavers 3x4 like this really looked funny. So did the stove oriented this way. So I took it all apart with the 4 extra pavers I bought and the scrap pieces of cement board I cut off in the beginning. I stuffed those back in the corner and made it 4x4, which I think looked a whole lot better. I thought I got video footage of doing that, but it's gone. Instead of watching that, you can watch me wrestle this wood stove into place, trying not to scratch up the concrete. I decided the wood stove looked better diagonal, and we'll be able to see the fire through the window from the whole room, which I think will be really nice. One of the reasons I decided to go with this stove is it has a big window. Now we need to vent the smoke outside because I don't want the smoke on the inside. Having the smoke venting inside the room is stupid. This wall thimble insulates the pipe as it goes through the wall so it doesn't catch the wall on fire, which is a good thing because I think catching the wall on fire is stupid. Before we install the wall thimble in the wall, we need to make space in the wall to accommodate the wall thimble inside the wall, which is just a fancy way of saying we need to poke a hole through the wall. Since this middle board got the whole middle cut out of it, we'll put some glue on here to help support these outside pieces. This is why I didn't put the exterior siding and weatherproof these end walls yet, because I knew I still had holes to poke through them. What I'm really liking about this setup are these clamps that lock the stovepipes together. Much better than the old stovepipes I've used in the past. Since there is no solid frame behind this OSB in the spots where I needed to attach all this paraphernalia, I decided to run these long carriage bolts, which I happen to have, all the way through the wall. Is that a good idea? I don't know. I'll find out. This fancy cap is supposed to give protection from both the rain and the wind. It looks big and bulky, but it's actually lightweight. These shields block much of the radiant heat, so the pipes can be close to the wall without catching the wall on fire, which is a good thing because having your walls catch on fire is stupid. Now that it's all put together, the next thing we need to do is build a fire in here, make sure it can support a fire without burning the whole place down, and make sure the smoke goes outside instead of staying inside. And make sure there isn't any other catastrophe that might happen that I hadn't even thought of. They recommend before installing this stove inside, fire the stove outside first. As the paint gets hot and does its final cure, it can release some foul-smelling smoke into the room. I decided just to let that happen inside because this container has big doors on both ends. It's well ventilated. That should blow out easily. And nobody needs to be in here while it's doing its thing. Well, it's about a week later. This is where the container was. Not to state the obvious or anything, but it's not there anymore. It's gone. The whole thing is gone. The trees look okay. They didn't get scorched. The other thing that went away was my voice. Well, it didn't actually go away, but it got really hoarse and I developed a cough. I needed to give it a few days to rest. That is why I did the second half of the video without talking and did a voiceover later. And while I was being a mute for a few days, I decided that was a good time to move the container from over there to over there where I want it to be. Right next to this container, which is closer to where I'm going to want to have it. Yeah, the container's fine. Did I have you going there for a moment? At least maybe for a split second. I made one little modification. I put these spacers in here to bring this out a little bit to help it clear this ledge a little better. This is my temporary make-do awning until I come up with a better awning solution to keep the rain from getting in the door. I didn't install the support that goes up here, bolts into the wall, clamps onto here, because I want to come up with more of a quick attach system for up here. I can unhook that, unbolt these, loosen up this collar. Then I can easily pull this whole thing off. The reason I chose the height I did for this, so when I take all this off, I can close the doors when I'm not here. I knew there would be some pipes sticking out here. I wanted that to clear this thing, to come out more like here. I didn't want it to come out up here because that makes it too close to the ceiling inside. I wanted enough clearance from the ceiling so we don't catch the ceiling on fire. Catching the ceiling on fire is stupid too. One of my concerns was this was going to be a big pain to take off and put back on again, but I did it when I moved the container. It went back together easier than I even imagined. All of those fancy parts and pieces made for a really nice setup. It was so easy to put together, even I was able to figure it out. The stove works great. It's more than enough to heat this space. I have to either make small fires or keep the door open, which I knew would be the case. It starts a good draft as soon as I light it, no problem with the draft. Sometimes when I open the door it does smoke a little bit, but that's been the case with every wood stove I've ever had. And as well ventilated as this room is, it hasn't been a problem. And when it's going, the walls and ceiling get warm, but nowhere near hot. I got this side of the room turned into a bedroom. Not a bad view from this window. Looks like there's some rain in the distance heading this direction. I was just kidding about using this crate for a piece of furniture, but I'm actually using it until I come up with something better. And there's a good view of the stove. This is not a paid promotion. I was looking for stoves. I found this one. I like the looks of it. I paid for it myself. What I really like is how easy it was to just put in my measurements and they sent all the components I needed. This wasn't the cheapest option, but the convenience of not having to go shopping for stove parts and figure out all the pieces I need, that was well worth what I paid for it. I did go into a local stove company, asked them if they could supply all these pieces for less. I told them what the price was through this company and he said, yeah, that's just what it costs. It was nice to have everything I needed just show up through FedEx, and I didn't have to take any trips into town to get any spare parts. One of the disadvantages of having a tiny stove, it's not going to accommodate standard industry-sized 16-inch pieces, which is just a fancy way of saying you're going to have to cut small pieces for your stove, which is one of the reasons why I got the larger of their stoves, so it can accommodate larger of the small pieces. Larger of the small pieces, does that make sense? I think it makes sense, but it probably doesn't make grammatical sense. Grammatical sense, I'm not sure that's good use of the English language either. Fortunately, I have the tools to make smaller pieces. The smart thing to do would probably be to make a jig instead of using your foot as a jig, right next to a sharp spinning chain. Only do it this way if you're a trained professional or you play one on YouTube. Something to consider with these small stoves, if you have to buy your wood, it may be difficult to find someone who sells small pieces. You might find someone who would cut them for you this small, but if they freshly cut them for you, chances are they might not be dry. If you're looking for dry, small pieces, that might be hard to do unless you can find someone who does what I just did and cut some standard pieces into small ones. They're probably not going to do that for very cheap. It might be expensive wood. If you do have to buy from somebody who's willing to cut them short from the beginning, you might have to do it ahead of time to give it time to dry, like a year or 6 months ahead of time, depending on the species of wood. Another advantage of heating with firewood, what if the world goes crazy? What if the propane supply gets shut off? What if the electric supply gets shut off? If you don't think that can happen, if you don't think the world can go crazy, consider the year 2020. If that wasn't crazy, at least it was borderline crazy. The world going crazy doesn't have to be human caused. It might be more likely to be a natural disaster. What if the massive Cascadia earthquake happens and supplies get cut off to the Pacific Northwest for an extended period of time? I think it's good to be prepared. It's always nice to know I'm always going to have the ability to heat, to cook, to boil water if I need to. If the gasoline supply gets cut off and I can't run my gas-powered saws, that's where the battery-powered chainsaw that you can charge with a solar panel can be a good thing until it breaks. But if you have a spare, or you could use hand tools, axes, hand saws, or I could walk around in the woods, just pick up sticks to burn. You might have to dry them first, bring them in, plan ahead, but I could keep warm with these. I'll put a link to these stoves in the description. It is an affiliate link. If you buy something through it, I will get a commission. I'm not expecting much, if anything, from that, but if it happens, it does help the channel, helps bring you more videos. If you want to know more about this shipping container home build, I'll put something up here for you to watch. And after I finish it, maybe I'll put the one up here about how I moved that container from over there to over there by hand. Or maybe it will be over here. I don't know. It'll be somewhere, unless I forget. Then it won't be anywhere.